My name is Shikha Pathak. I am the Manager Awareness and Skill Building at SciSec. Welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is a part of SciSec's weekly series titled Samgachatvam. May we all progress together. The objective is to cover various cybersecurity topics and provide conceptual overview. Let us start with some ground rules first. All attendees of the webinar will be on mute by default. We will have a question and answer session at the end of this presentation. So in case you have any questions, you can share it on the chat window and the speaker will respond after the presentation. We will be recording this webinar and it will be uploaded on SciSec's YouTube channel. So you can revisit it anytime later. This is the 26th webinar. The topic today is applying the principles of privacy and security to product design. We are sure that you will find these series of webinars very useful. Next week, we have a webinar by Seclor. And here is a list of all our upcoming webinars. So stay tuned, keep following us on our LinkedIn and Twitter account for all these updates. We'll be sharing all details soon. In case you want to access videos of our previous webinars, then they can be accessed on SciSec's YouTube channel. As usual, we will have an assessment after this webinar, which will be kept open for 60 minutes. The questions will be from topics which have already been covered in the webinar. Those who get 9 or more than 9 marks out of 12 will be provided with a certificate of achievement. Those who are not able to take the assessment will be provided with a certificate of participation. At the end of the assessment, you will also be asked to provide feedback. We request you to please provide your genuine feedback and be assured that it will have no bearing on your assessment. Please provide your details very clearly while taking this assessment, as a certificate will be generated basis these details. We shall be sharing the link of the assessment in the question and answer chat session window. Please note that this assessment is open only to those who have participated in this webinar. Let me now take this opportunity to introduce today's speakers for the webinar. We have with us Mr. Chirans, who is the manager at Deloitte. He has over 10 years of insightful experience in cybersecurity and information security, helping multinational companies improving their maturity capabilities in cybersecurity, data privacy, and information security. His contributions are spread across different industry sectors, ranging from healthcare, manufacturing, life sciences, banking, and e-commerce. We welcome you, sir. We also have with us Mr. Ashish Vakharia, who is a deputy manager with Deloitte. He leads the data privacy and security projects. He has over 8 years of experience in information security systems, personal data management, consultation, auditing, risk management, and training experience and expertise. He has worked in various global complex engagements across different industry sectors. Welcome, Ashish. I'm sure you will find this session very enriching. Now over to Chiran sir for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks for the introduction, Shikha.
Yes,
So
sir,
let me just share my screen. So I hope the screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So today let's talk about privacy and security. I mean, which is primarily focused on application and software development methodologies. Because today's world is evolving with the tech-focused environment where a lot of services and technologies are being enabled through application softwares. So, and plus the widespread presence of all these applications across different geographies makes it very imperative to have privacy and security go hand in hand along with the development life cycle of these products. Otherwise, we'll end up landing in a situation where we have a product design which is not compliant to a geographic specific regulation, or we will end up facing a data breach or a lawsuit. Yes, sir.
I know.
So let's go on to the next slide. Yeah. Yeah. So
Paytm, Paytm.
just I'll give you a brief. Okay, Shika, could you? I mean, I think there's someone who's not gone on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi,
Okay.
requesting all the attendees to please ensure that their mics are on mute. We are from our end trying to ensure that all attendees are on mute. Please don't unmute yourself unless you have a question to ask, and let those questions be at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think we can continue.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Shika, and thanks everyone for going on mute. Yeah. Yeah, so just giving you a brief heads up on the agenda. So, although the main focus here is on understanding how privacy and security can be ingrained into software and application development methodologies, we first need some background on it. So, we start with looking into what is privacy in itself, and why is, I mean, privacy is even important, and what is personal data, what is sensitive personal data. So only when we understand this, we will start knowing its importance of why do we need to safeguard it better. So after we look into that, we'll actually head on to understand what are the current challenges that various organizations in the world are facing today, because they do such diverse kind of, they are in such diverse environments wherein they deal with a lot of internal departments and external stakeholders and service providers. So it becomes even more challenging to protect and safeguard the privacy of their employees or of their clients or their end customers. Then comes the key importance of data classification and the safeguards that we have today, or that the safeguards that we need to build against specific classification and the labeling schemes of the personal and the sensitive personal data. And in addition to this data classification schemes, we'll also touch upon the type of safeguards, which will talk about what are actually safeguards and how do the various nature of safeguards help us in different types of protection in each of the threats against the privacy of the individuals or against the security aspects. Post that, we'll look at the current top regulations or the key regulations across the geography and their key mandates that are very important to be adhered to. And in addition to that, we'll also look into how do we achieve privacy protection by adhering to these regulatory mandates that's being called out, even though it's not comprehensive, but it's the top regulatory requirements that are there across the world. And then it is the different type of approaches that we are going to specifically highlight on software development and application development. So where we have got proactive approaches and reactive approach. So we will discuss upon whether we need both of these approaches in a particular industry, or we need to go with one or the either of them, and importance of each of these in the life cycle of software development. And then at the end of this session, we will also talk about how do we make sure that the real data, or what do we call it as in local parlance, it is the live data which is used in a development or a test environment. How do we safeguard such data in environment which is not the production environment? So do we need to have similar kind of safeguards and controls there, or how do we go about it? That's about safeguarding it in the non-production. Then at the end, okay, it's about personal data management. How do we make sure that the personal data that we deal with in our company is going to be handled in the right way? Is it going to be retained for as long as it should be retained? Is it going to be, how is it going to be ensured that it will be disposed properly? How is it going to be ensured that the necessary mechanisms are in place to mask it or encrypt it or obfuscate it? So yeah, so this is the overview of how we will approach this current topic around privacy and security in software development. So let's begin with each one of the items, and I'll hand it over to Ashish now, who's my colleague on this session, and he'll take over for the first few minutes, and then I'll resume back. Over to you, Ashish. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Shirant. Welcome you all for the session. I think looks like agenda looks very broad, but don't worry. This is how nowadays privacy is being a king in terms of software development area. So, as Shirant was mentioning, like what is the importance of ensuring the personal data protection? Why nowadays personal data protection is focusing on in terms of software development? We'll let you know one by one once we move. So, Shirant, can you move to next slide? So before we try to understand what is the SDLC, software development life cycle, first we need to understand what is the life cycle of personal data. So any personal data nowadays, you see, it's not possible to go through a life cycle. So personal data also have some life cycle which starts from your data collection, then it's moved to a data storage, then it goes to a processing where processing it includes modification and correction, then it's moved to data transfer and data destruction. If we understand data lifecycle properly, at the end we are able to achieve the requirement of privacy by design. That is the end goal of this webinar, where it makes sure that whatever the software development we are doing or the product we are designing, it meets the requirement of privacy by design. So if you understand how the data lifecycle works, I will tell you with example. So basically, if any company wants to collect, let's say, consider any tool which is collecting a data. So what data collections in terms of personal data? So if you see on the right hand side, there are two types of personal data which is involved. Is something called personal data and there's something called sensitive personal data. So let's say if I'm collecting both information which I need, let's say I'm building a railway reservation system. So if I'm building a software on railway reservation system, what data collection I'll be doing? So I have to list out all the required fields which is required in terms of where I'll taking the input of the passengers, right? That is a data collection. Where I'm storing my data storage, is it I am storing within the India or I am moving out? That will be a different topic as per the regulation, because it includes cross border transfer. So that will be a separate part which we'll be discussing in the later slides. Then it comes to a data processing. So what data processing? Did I book my tickets? Did I cancel my tickets? All this processing happening which is inside called data processing. Then data transfer, did I converted my confirmed ticket into PDF and did I transfer back that system already transfer back to your email address, or you receive a SMS saying that your ticket has been booked, the PNR number, and data destruction. So let's say any railway reservation system has some detention period. Let's say if you got booked ticket today, maybe that PNR number might be valid for next 30 days, because if you're booking ticket from the date of journey, I'm saying. So let's say if you book ticket today for next month, 1st of October, and once you travel, the journey is over. Post that, 30 ticket will be available. You can see that PNR details. Post that, that data destruction will happen. So that data will be deleted. So this is how the data life cycle of a personal data. Now, how we'll incorporate into the software development life cycle, that is we are going to discuss separately on that. But now why I'm saying personal data is very sensitive, because if you see, there are lots of importance given to us. So because many of the software products which nowadays in the markets are focusing or getting penalized because of the regulatory violations, because they are not meeting the basic requirements of a regulation or personal data which is asking. So there are nowadays very renowned personal data regulations are available. So basically one of the good regulation we know is GDPR. So there are various penalties has been happen in terms of regulatory violation for software development. which product is not capable of ensuring privacy by design, privacy by default, and that is not adhering to your other requirements of Article 32 of GDPR, that is a technical requirement or safeguarding that data. Then there are some of the other issues which impact to your brand value. If you are a good market provider of software and suddenly if you get penalized, there is a zero brand value for your product, and you might face a lot of uh, business loss due to this brand value, because it's already in the news. They're saying that no, this software comes with a bug which helped hacker or unauthorized users to hack the uh, personal data or personal data information or sensitive personal data information of the people. So that is very important when we basically trying to understand how I'll be building my product which takes care of privacy by design and privacy by default, which we'll discuss next slide. Privacy data, basically it's a simple definition. If you see on the left hand side, it says means any information related to identified or identifiable natural person. So when I say natural person, is a data subject, end user, whatever information is belong to that person which is identifiable or identified, it's considered under the privacy information. So meantime I give the same example. Let's say you have a Excel sheet which says 10,000, but just having 10,000, it's not a personal data, right? When I add personal data name, even let's say personal data, my name, Ashish, even that attribute will not call out for a personal data, because I don't know what is that. Ashish 10,000, I don't know. Is it password? Is it his salary? Is it his bank account number? I don't know. But when I say, when I give heading salary and then Ashish, then it releases my personal data, that is identifiable information about Ashish, saying that Ashish is his one person who's having salary is 10,000. So that becomes my personal data, which I don't want people, because it's basically the personal data is only for myself. I don't want to be disclosed with anyone. That is where it's privacy. So it's my right to keep it the personal matter very secret, or that is what it's all about the personal data. So this is just a background of how privacy and its importance, because there are lots of other issues you can see on the left hand side, which is will explain you what is that. Moving to next slide, it talks about what are the various challenges nowadays industry is facing in terms of software development or product development or application development.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Ashish, now we can hear you. I think your voice trailed off for a bit.
Okay, sorry. So I'll repeat everything. So as let's see now, we'll move to this next slide. It basically talks about the challenges how software development industry is facing nowadays in terms of product designing and development. So first point, it talks about inability to identify critical data. So many a times it happens, organization don't have a proper inventory or a mechanism to identify what personal data is already available with them. So if I take the same example, let's say if I'm into a railway ticketing system development team or in the organization, if I'm having that product, today I might be working on, let's say, MySQL database. Tomorrow I might move to a different database, Oracle or maybe MongoDB or any other databases. Because I will see, because from the cost point of view, resource point of view, and synchronization point of view, and many other good benefits that new development or new database is giving, I will move. So whatever data which is left out as a part of SQL data, it might remain in the backup side, backup copies, or it might remain as archive, which is no longer required for as per the regulation requirements. So on. That becomes a challenging, because it's still a personal data. That is one of the challenges where many companies is facing, how to do the data discovery of such no personal data. So there are nowadays because this is one of the requirement from the principle as well. Nowadays there are many softwares also available in the market which helps you to identify or do the data discovery in terms of wherein all your personal data or sensitive personal data has been located in your systems. Moving to next is basically talks about inadequate governance and monitoring. So in terms of even many software development, as I said earlier, many software development companies have faced penalized against non-competence with the regulation requirements. That is because one of the reasons also inadequate governance and monitoring, because many of the organizations don't have a proper implementation of security requirements, or they don't know about the privacy requirements, what exactly they have to implement. There is no governance, there is no policy, there is no proper set procedures in the companies. So that times it also brings lots of issue related to you might see lots of patches has been released, some bugs has been identified. That could be the one of the reasons of inadequate governance and monitoring. Moving to next is inadequacy of third-party governance. So most of the times, if I being a main developer and if I have to give outsource some of the work of my software development part, so I'll give to my third parties where I'll not sometimes I as a so this is where two things which comes as per the regulation, that is called controller, data controller and data processor. So data controller is being me, and I'll be handing over my some of the tasks to data processor, that is become a third parties or third party vendor. So where they're processing on behalf of me. So they also sometimes I let's say I most of the times I might be 100% compliant with security requirements, privacy requirements, but sometimes it happens the whatever work which I've handed over to third parties, they are non-competent to requirement of information security, privacy compliance requirements, and so on. And that is also happen because if that leads to a breach of my personal data. So for example, if I take an example of bank, so bank being a controller which is processing all your information, and that is handed over to a let's say now you requested for ATM. Now bank will not print ATM card with you because it's a plastic card. So third party who is there, I will be giving this contact to a third party where I'll give all entire detail of yours, what is the PIN number, what is the 16-digit card number and CVC number. Everything is been given to third party. Now because of the third party is not properly maintaining security, all the data has been breached. So there could be chances if people have not changed the password when they receive a ATM pin. If they're using a default password, there could be chances that hack can happen. So that is where that nowadays you see inadequacy in third-party governance. That is also very much required, and that is also mandated from various regulations in across various countries. Moving to next, one of the challenges which is very important and one of the favorite, and I most of the time whenever I do audit or whenever I go for implementation, I make sure this control is very much implemented. It says lack of detection and alerting controls. Now what happens to this is, let me tell you a good case study for that. There was one bank who they had their different development team who is taking care of their software product. So it's Omni software which they are using for banking system, and they had a lots of team of 10 people around for software development. And somehow because of the resource crunch and the budget issue, they had to ask like three people to leave the that team or development team. Basically, they wanted to fire these people. So they have been asked. They have been given the 2 months of time for notice, and everything happened. They left, and suddenly after 2 years one of the customer of that bank complained to the manager saying that whatever money is being debited to my account, right, the paisa part, at the end the paisa part is not coming to my account. So for example, if someone is deposited around let's say 10,000, 25 paisa is not reflecting to my account. So there is something issue. Manager said this is not possible, it's everything is nowadays online, you don't have to worry, you will receive the 25 paisa also. Then he showed his passbook, the transaction history, everything. Then manager got doubts. He said, "Let me also cross check for the other customers." So there are around 80,000 customers for that bank. So they cross checked. They found that none of the customers paisa part is reflecting their accounts. So that was one of the key things, the problem they face. Now, what is the root cause? Where that paisa part is going? So everyone, the team come together, security team, the legal team, everything came together. The incident they are trying to identify what exactly happened. Now somehow later they found, after 2-3 months of proper analysis and forensic analysis and everything, they found there is one more account in their bank which was created by the developer who was got fired. With one of the developer among the three who got fired from the bank, he have created he have changed the code in a way that whatever the paisa part people are depositing to their bank account, it will move to his account. So that was the mischief he have done before he leave the company. So when the bank checked that his account, he had around 35 crore rupees in his account. So that was the eye opener for everyone, where the lack of detection and alerting mechanism. So when if I am surviving notice period, no one was monitoring what I am doing, what kind of data source code I am accessing, I am modifying. My logs was not reviewed, and I left the company. That was the main issue behind this entire measure. Later on, that guy has been caught. Whatever he money spent, around 2-3 crores, has, I don't know what happened, but remaining money has been taken back to the bank. So this is one of the key area where we have to be very alert. And last but not least is basically talks about awareness and know-how, because multiple times many organizations don't spend time in giving awareness about new regulations or good standards available in the market, which talks about information security and privacy to their employees or contractors. At the end, it leads to a human error. Human error is, at the end, it leads to a penalty. So it's always good you make sure that your there is 100% awareness has been given to your employees. So that was a basic big challenges the software development team is facing, software development industry is facing. That's we wanted to highlight. So it might also lead to your intellectual property, business critical data, and personal and sensitive data. So all this picture is very important when in terms of you want to protect these 3 points. Chint will move next slide. So now basically now we understand the risks, like how different 5 challenges we have seen right now. There's always a good practice which company or many of the industries follows is they do the classification of their data. It's always a best practice. You classify your information, what is coming in, what is going out, and basis on that you spend your effort, spend your money, spend your resources in terms of implementing those controls. So if I am owner of one of the organization, I will be more interested to focus my controls on restricted, confidential, and internal, where I will be more I'll put extra controls on the restricted and confidential information. So what comes under the restricted thing, which is, if you see, sensitive personal data, which you already discussed on slide number 1. What is sensitive personal data? Which includes my ethnics, race, my gender, and my trade union membership, and so on. Other details which is part of my personal data. Biometric details also be a sensitive personal data. Now, there are, apart from personal data, there are also some of the information which also qualify under the restricted, is something joint venture and MNS, business merger acquisition related information, then minutes of board meetings and secret formulas or IP intellectual properties, which is sometimes we consider as a part of restricted classification. Moving to a confidential classification, it covers your business forecast, metrics, then departments, basically business, what, how my business is performing, and so on. That is very important. Now it's up to a company to company whether they keep their software source code under the confidential, because this data classification keeps on changing. You can use any words, but this is the basically basically adopted a good practice in terms of data classification. It talks about restricted, confidential, and internal. So personal data sometimes also considered as a confidential information. Moving to internal, which that data should flow within my organization. Let's say if my organization is in US and I'm sitting in Bangalore or Mumbai, so only that 3 geolocation my information should move. That is called internal information. Within internal, there could be a strict internal, which is basically that information should flow within India only, like that. So there could be a further classification you can do. Talking about the safeguards which align to your restricted, confidential, and internal classification. So there mainly, if you see, there will be mainly 3 safeguards which we talks about. Which talks from the physical control, your administrative control, and technical and logical control. So what comes under the physical control bucket is basically entire your physical perimeter security about your buildings or premises and so on. In terms of physical entry controls, or you're securing your offices or rooms or facilities, or basically in terms of you see whenever you go to the offices or in the colleges or other buildings, you see smoke detectors, fire extinguisher has been kept. That is a part of your personal security or personal physical security. Because what happens when we develop some software code, it's reside in my data center. So I have to ensure that there should not be a physical theft happen to my server because everything is hosted there. So that time also this physical safeguard is very important. Administrative controls is more in terms of your driving through governance of privacy policies, procedures, guidelines, and controls, where management is actively involved in ensuring that you understood the regulation requirement. There is awareness, 100% awareness happening within my organization. And coming back to technical and logical controls is more in terms of configuration management. You put a proper patch management, hardening of your controls, hardening of your applications, operating systems, and so on. That becomes my technical and logical controls. Logical access, logical controls also in terms of logical access, giving access to the right people, privilege access should be reviewed, and removal of access. This becomes my technical and logical controls. So this needs to be implemented basis on the what is the weightage I have given. So restricted will have more of the more controls being given because the risk is more there. Even from the regulatory point of view, even more from the business brand value point of view, and many other risks which we saw earlier. And there is something called public, which we know it's okay if people sees those information because it's available on my notice boards or my websites, which I want people to know. So that is the public information, which has a minimal risks that might impact my organization. But it is always good to take a proper communication procedure, because before you communicate anything outside the world, you have to have a proper administrative control. That is nothing but communication process. You have to have proper approval. Whatever you are going to put the content on your website, that has been approved by your management. And then reactive controls, which is basis on the in case of someone took objection against whatever you put it on the public website, or that reactive approach, reactive control may be into might turn into the legal requirement of it. So that is all about the classification and the safeguards. Chirant will move to next slide. So this is very interesting. I just give you a brief about the privacy regulations around the world, and there are some renowned privacy regulations, and what are their key traits for the protection or privacy by design. So if GDPR, it's mainly focusing on the consent and notices. So consent and notices is basically, like before giving or processing any information, which we seen in the personal data lifecycle process, storage, process, transfer, and destruct. That is basically I should have a consent before I collect any information. So data subject rights. So data subject rights is also basically the rights given to the citizen of that countries. Basically, the main focus for me to give in the GDPR is something called privacy by design. So GDPR talks about privacy by design and privacy by default. I think most of us is a Facebook user. If you go to your Facebook profile, if you go to settings, there is something called a privacy check option is given. And whenever you see privacy default option, what is privacy default? If you see about your display picture or Facebook profile picture, it should be always moved to only me instead of it's converted to the public. If it's already marked as only me, it's nothing but a privacy by default, nothing but a privacy first approach. So there are very less companies nowadays in the market who take a privacy less approach. And what is privacy by design? Basically, privacy by design comes into a design itself. There's something called design. So while I'm designing something, be it service, be it product, or be it any other requirement, design is very important, where I think of what is a privacy and what is the protection requirement during the design phase itself. So privacy by design. So I might consider the requirement of data subject rights. I might consider the requirement of a GDPR or a basic principle about the privacy. So that is nothing but your privacy by design. So cross-border data transfer, each regulation comes with a different requirement of cross-border data transfer, where what set of data is allowed to be transferred. You cannot, some of the regulations says you cannot transfer all sensitive data. Some of the regulations say you only transfer personal data, but within that personal data there is some restriction. So likewise, depending on the each regulation, there is a enforcement has been given. So according to GDPR, they also have a risk rating given to each countries where you can allow to send the data to that country. Some of the data you might have to take permission from the authorities if you are sending. There are some timelines also given by each regulation about the breach notification and so on. If you also see something called CCPA, CCPA is nothing but California Consumer Privacy Act, which is also in the same line of GDPR, but there are some requirements given, more rights given to consumers, and it's more from the sales point of view of your personal data. That is where CCPA comes into the picture. But most of the time, if you see the requirement of safeguarding those is remains same across the different regulation. PDPB is also interesting topic you might see in couple of months when our PDPB, Personal Data Protection Bill of India, it becomes, right now it's you read as a Personal Data Protection Bill, but when it's get enacted, you will read as a Personal Data Protection Act, PDPA. So that becomes also a very interesting thing which India will have, and many of our personal data will come under the radar of this PDPA bill. PIP-EDA is basically a Canadian Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documentation Act. That is also belongs to Canada, which talks on the same line of your PDPB and around GDPR. Then you have cybersecurity law, China, and there is something called Russian data protection law. So this is overall different requirements and key traits if you see, and if you see there is a privacy by design, cross-border data transfer, and consents becomes a very common traits which each regulation across the different countries have identified. Now, basis on this, now Chiranti will explain you how these requirements or key traits basically we have to consider when we go for different methods in the software development, be it your agile method or SDLC. That Chirant will discuss in more detail. Chirant, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ashish,
Yeah,
for the
thank you.
explanation. Yeah, okay. Let me move on to the next slide. Okay, we'll before going to the focus topic on how do we ensure privacy and security in the life cycle of software development, let's just have a quick glance at the principles of privacy. So it's around 7 or 8 key aspects which go around lawfulness and transparency, which means that how do you, I mean, ensure that, okay, if you're actually processing data of an individual, are you doing it as per the law of the land? So if it says if that you have to if you're actually handling credit score information of an individual while you're processing loan data, are you actually handling it in such a way that it's as per the law of the land, which says it should be what do you call regulated by proper access control, and it should be handled in a secure manner, and it should be stored in a secure manner? And is there enough transparency in the way you're actually handling this personal information? So there is something like a privacy policy in many organizations which say how we are going to process an individual's data, where you're going to store the individual's data, and what is the purpose of processing this data. So all this is getting covered as part of lawfulness and transparency, which is a very key objective as part of one of the principles of privacy by design, and it's called out in Article 5.1a of GDPR. So even though we are covering most of the regulations here, we are specifically touching upon GDPR because most other regulations are also very similar to what GDPR has already called out, with slightly different aspects also being touched upon in their own regulations. And then next comes the purpose limitation. So if I'm actually doing a loan processing activity where I need to analyze the CIBIL scores of individuals and do a credit check of individuals before issuing loans, I need to limit my what do you call purpose to only do that. I should not actually use that data to market it to any other third-party sources so that they can receive what do you call credit cards based on good credit scores or CIBIL scores. So that is something that should not be done, because the purpose here is only to issue loans, and that is something that should be made clear while even taking consent from the individuals who are giving their personal data to us. And data minimization, this also goes hand in hand with the purpose, wherein I collect only such data which is actually required for me to fulfill the purpose. Okay, let me give you an example of so currently today we've got a lot of mobile apps which have what do you call, which are wallets, right? Like say we've got Airtel, we've got Paytm, we've got multiple other options as well. So let's say tomorrow, let's say when you install this app, it actually asks you permission to read your contacts and read your current, and then access to your camera and your SMS. Now, if the purpose of the wallet is just to do closed loop transactions, which would mean that you will only interact with the app based what do you call services, then you should, I mean, the app should not be accessing all the other data sets on your mobile device. So, which in itself is not complying to the principle of data minimization. So this was the other key aspect there. And storage limitation. So now I'm collecting so much of personal data from all my clients and customers. Now there are clear-cut guidelines in GDPR that I should not be storing personal data of individuals beyond beyond the specified timelines. So there is a specific timeline until which only I will be retaining it, and beyond that I should never be storing it, and I should delete all copies of the personal data. So if I store it beyond that, there could only be reasons for a regulatory or a law enforcement requirement. Apart from that, I'm not allowed to store it, which would be a violation. And then comes the accuracy, integrity, and confidentiality. So whatever data that I collect on my platform should be maintained in an accurate manner and should be accurate enough. It should not be, changed over time. So which would again, accuracy and integrity both go hand in hand, which should not get modified or altered. So if I collect data of individuals related to, okay, if there are 100 customers of mine who have given all their data related to name, place, address, and date of birth, and their CIBIL scores, that data should remain accurate throughout the life cycle until the individual has requested to modify that data. And confidentiality is by nature of it, it's to ensure that, okay, how am I going to make sure that this data is accessible only to the individual to whom it concerns and to the specific teams or specific support personnel who need to provide these services. So it's restricted, the by nature of access, it is restricted only to the set of people who need to access it just for enablement of services. So, and then comes the accountability principle, where any such actions that are performed by the organization while storing, or transmitting, or handling the personal data, they shall be made accountable for all these actions. So, it is very important that the organization will also be able to demonstrate that they have performed all these actions while handling personal data. So it ties back to one of the key challenges which Ashish also talked about, that you need to build capabilities to identify and detect the actions that were performed by your people. Otherwise, you will be held accountable, but you will not be able to demonstrate compliance towards your accountability. And then at the end, one of the key aspects is also provisioning data subjects' rights. So in most of these regulations, it's very important that an individual whose data is processed on the application or on the mobile app or on the platform is able to access his information or request for his own information whenever required, or is also able to what do you call, migrate to any other competitor service providers, or even issue a request for delete of his own data. So when I say migrate, if I take an example of a telecom service provider, assuming that I am a postpaid customer of Airtel today, and I have my specific plans and my specific usage patterns in Airtel for the last 5 years. But now, if I want to migrate to Vodafone, I don't want Vodafone to again start gathering all my insights to give me a very specific plan for my usage. I want Vodafone to make use of the same data that Airtel already has. So they should allow me to migrate this data set to Vodafone. So that's about right to migrate the data. And I should also be able, as an individual, should be able to modify my own data set. So this, in a nutshell, is the highlights of the main principles around privacy by design. So now let's look at the software development life cycle, which is the waterfall methodology, as we all know, and I'll tell you why is it called a proactive approach. So the thing is here, the idea is that we address privacy and security concerns upfront at the stage of requirements gathering and at the design stage itself, rather than trying to see what kind of gaps are already there just before deployment of a particular source code into the production environment. So when a new feature is being developed, so we do all the requirements analysis, gather all the functional requirements, design the functionality. So at the same time, all these things go hand in hand with privacy and security as well, where we understand that okay, the privacy and security requirement should also be captured, and designs of such security functionality should flow into their development. So let me explain by taking an example of the same wallet product which I just highlighted. So in these mobile apps which are actually behaving like a wallet, so let's assume that this wallet company procures a license, let's say the NBFC license, to operate as a money lender. So because they wanted to expand their business. So hello. Sorry, I'm hearing some background.
Uh, I think it's
Okay, I'll continue then, Shika. Yeah.
yes, you can continue. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So because they wanted to expand their business, they procure this additional license to do money lending operations, so that they can issue micro loans to MSMEs and other such people. So what they do is now they want to enhance the product features so that they can roll out this feature to the product. So, but before they do that, they should also need to understand that initially they were only a wallet company who were operating in a closed loop for their own services. Now that they're opening up by getting the micro lending feature available to them, where they'll have to gather more personal data from individuals, whether it is taxation information or salary information or any other credit score information of the individual. They also need to bear in mind that this will involve them taking an additional consent. So I'm just touching back upon the privacy principles here, which we just discussed. So they would have to take additional consent from the individual because the initial consent was never to actually do loan processing or lending operations. So the initial consent will not be implicit for the new features that they are going to roll out. So they will have to develop a new set of terms and conditions and explicit consent features, which will go as requirements into the plan for the overall new product or the new release that they're trying to roll out. And the lawfulness of processing will be touched upon by aspect of okay, now the NBFC has a regulation which says about how a particular transaction should be what you call carried out on a mobile app or on a technology platform before the lending operations are performed, on how the data in the backend of all this personal data of the individual should be stored in the backend. So all these things go in as requirements before it's developed as a feature. And the same thing applies to the principle of data minimization and storage, where they need to ensure that data minimization and purpose limitation. So they need to ensure that all the purposes and the data that they are going to capture is only for the purpose of doing the micro lending services and for the same business of it. And when it comes to data minimization, so when we talk of a mobile app, currently if the app is only installed on the phone of a end user, and it is actually gathering data sets from the mobile phone, such as like contact details or even the location of the phone, so for better experience on the platform. So now because of micro lending services, they should not release an update, forced update on the app, and after the user updates it, it should not start fetching details of all the SMSs or all the WhatsApp messages in the phone, so that they can directly read how many credit transactions have happened to you, and they will be able to automatically analyze, okay, what is the credit worthiness of this individual. So this is not a right thing to do if it has not been properly communicated to the individual. And if it doesn't fall under the scope of data minimization, so for doing loan processing and lending operations, you need not do remote monitoring of the individual itself, thereby intriguing the privacy of that individual. So these are the things that needs to be kept in mind while going ahead with a development of this feature. And then comes the testing. So after you develop all these security features, you will test them. So all these aspects of lawfulness, purpose limitations, and accuracy and storage of data will actually be tested by different teams. Now, there are two aspects to testing. Now, there is an aspect that the functional product is becoming ready and ready to launch. And the business and the functional teams and the functional users will actually test whether the new product of lending is working in the right way it should be working. But the security team will actually test whether the initial set of requirements to adhere to compliance mandates and to the privacy and security requirements have been correctly developed, which may range from addressing the consent or data minimization purposes, storage, or even the authentication aspects, such as if you need multi-factor and single sign-on, have these been incorporated or not? And then the sign-offs will be obtained from these two sets of stakeholders, which would be from security team and from the business teams. And then it will be reviewed at the final stage by the application owners or the development team owners, who make sure that the software has gone through the necessary checks and balances before it's going to be deployed. And then it's getting deployed by a dedicated team who is meant for production support and production deployment, which is in today's industry, it's called production support staff or DevOps teams, based on the methodology that they use. So this is how the proactive approach in a SDLC waterfall lifecycle is carried out, and the software is designed in accordance with privacy and security principles that have been called out in various regulations and within the organizations themselves. Moving on to the next one, which is also proactive approach in privacy by design, but this is a slightly different variant of the waterfall model, because there are certain kind of industries today, like startups, who are into the B2C segment, especially, who do not follow the waterfall model because of inherent delays associated with the waterfall model, which lead to a lot of cost implications. So they use the agile methodology, where simultaneous design, development, and testing is carried out for various parts of the application, rather than waiting for one complete component to finish a particular activity and do the next set of activities around testing. All the components of a particular software are developed simultaneously and tested in parallel. So, but yeah, in a nutshell, it resembles the waterfall model. Only a small variation is that the initial phases is actually going to be called brainstorm phase and the design phase, where the similar set of activities around identification of all the privacy and security requirements is done and captured into the designs. And the developments are done parallelly on the software functionality plus the security features, and tested independently as well. And so that and the integration is also tested there. But the final testing will be very similar to the waterfall model, wherein the security teams will test all the features of security and privacy on the application or on the software product that has been developed, and the business teams will test the software functionality, and final go ahead is done on the production. So both are similar, just that agile methodology is more suited to a fast-paced environment, and it's more customer-driven, and customer focus is more on this model. So yeah, now the next one is a reactive approach. So let me also tell you why these two approaches are documented differently. Now, with the proactive approach, we will ensure that we will catch all the problems upfront, or we will not be in a situation where we will have to, we are into the production environment and we are live right now in the market, but we don't know what are our problems, because we would have already dealt with it in the initial phases and systematically built our products to suit that particular market and to the need of that particular market. But what happens that alone is not sometimes sufficient, or most cases that alone is not sufficient, because you do build such products considering all the privacy and security requirements, but over time or on a continual basis, when you maintain the product, developed product, there are various aspects to it, such that people from different support teams or engineers or developers who access this product for various different reasons, and plus there could be aspects that minor releases are upgraded to the product, which will bring in new additional risks which haven't been factored into so at the time of the requirements gathering phase. So these can only be caught, or can these can mostly be caught only in the reactive approach, which revolves around three or four different aspects of it. So let's just look into what it actually pertains to. So one of the first things in the reactive approach is the early detection phase, where this early detection phase is actually part of the proactive life cycle of software development. Just that I'm calling it out separately because of the nature of the approach here. Because this is the idea of this approach in early detection is that any product that you develop, irrespective of whether you have considered a security and a privacy requirement or not, you are going to do a source code review of that, not from a feature perspective, but to understand if there are any web application security, what do you call, vulnerabilities in it, something like is SQL injection, or something like indirect cross references, or cross indirect references, or basically cross-site scripting, or anything of that sort, if has it been remediated or not. So this is a checkpoint to ensure that before a particular source code is put on the production environment, you're going to check against. So mostly the checks are done against OWASP Top 10, which is basically Open Web Application Security Project Standard, which is a global standard these days. And against that, there are top 10 web application security risks against which it is assessed. So if you do this check, you will at least be reasonably sure that your application is not exposed to the most known vulnerabilities in the industry today. So that's the early detection thing. Just because before your code is into the production, you're going to detect this problem. Then comes the pre-deployment detection. So let's say you do the source code security review, but because your application is going to be there on the open internet, being accessible to all the users across the globe, or all the users or all the consumers, you would have to do a penetration testing. And penetration testing will actually help you identify whether the identified gap or the vulnerability, like say for example, if SQL injection is a gap currently there in your developed code, and it has not been checked in the source code security review, in the penetration testing you will get to know whether this can be exploited. So if that particular thing can be exploited, then the severity of that finding will finding or the concern will increase, and you would have to remediate it just before go live. So there's a slight difference between doing a source code security review and a penetration test, where the objective of a penetration test, generally called PT, is to identify whether a particular gap or a weakness or a vulnerability in the system can be exploited. So this is the pre-deployment detection. Then we look at the post-implementation detection. So there are some other factors which cannot be detected before deployment, as in which will give more insights with different kinds of controls, such as doing audits or regular vulnerability assessments, or any such solutions that you have in place to detect unauthorized changes to your production source code, or unauthorized changes to your security components in the organization. So this is by way of achieving or by way of setting up teams to do, like say, periodic reviews or security reviews against your application and its functionality and the security that it's providing, to gain more insightful objectives into where are the current operational gap, or is there a design gap in the implemented application. And periodic vulnerability assessments are generally part of it, so that gets covered as part of the periodic audits. And when I say detect unauthorized changes, so you can actually let's assume that you have pushed a particular release to a mobile application which is on your production environment now. But what if few months down the line there were some developers who, because of the DevOps model, they ended up modifying the source code and pushing up a minor release on top of it onto the production. But because you have built in enough intelligence onto your source code maintaining pipelines or the softwares, and to detect any unauthorized change to the application, you will be able to trigger an alert and roll back the change that was performed in an unauthorized manner and thoroughly review it again through the necessary checks that have to be done before it again gets deployed onto the production. So this was around the post-implementation detection. Now there is one more aspect around security incident. So this is not a detection check, but in generally in all the industries, you have dedicated teams to do incident and event monitoring. So this is primarily focused on security incident and event monitoring. So assume that in the worst case scenario, there is a particular breach that happens because a particular mobile application started revealing data outside, or basically, let's say the backend of a particular application stack got exposed. So I've come across a particular scenario wherein in one of the industries, so it was in a B2C segment where people you could actually book tickets, make their trip plans and all that. So, but what happened? One of the security researchers was able to find out that their production database got exposed in public. So where some so but it was an old database which was migrated to another system many years back. But because they were able to detect this, so they went through a breach. Now, because this happened in India and this was a small base of customers, so I mean there was no such specific regulation in India at that time which could hold them accountable for all this. But if you are considering the current scenario of all the active regulations and such a breach happens, you would be held accountable for all these things and be penalized also. So this security incident aspect brings in a new dimension to revisit the entire application security of the software that's already been designed and put into the platform. Let's say the investigation turns out and says that, okay, the outcome of this investigation is such that there is a loophole in the design of your software product where you say that, okay, you're masking all the sensitive fields of the customer in a particular screen of the mobile app, but it doesn't appear to be so, and wherein you're exposing all the data in direct view. So it's in all in plain text. So all these things come to light when there happens to be an incident and there's a foregoing investigation on that. So this is the other dimension of the last dimension around the reactive approach. So in an industry, generally, you need to have a combination of both of these approaches, which is both proactive and the reactive approach. Only then will you have a reasonably comprehensive sense of security around the software products that you have developed. Okay, so let me go to, yeah. Yeah, now, okay, now it is about safeguarding live data. So when I say live data, this is more, I'm referring to the production data. So production data will, in most cases, they will have personal data, they will have business critical data or intellectual property. So let's say if there is a requirement that for the wallet company's mobile app, who's going to do loan processing or lending services, in order to test that feature, the team of developers wants to developers or the testers want to test the uh, feature on a test environment, but with real data which is already there of their customers in the production. So no, they just place a request to the production team. Now, if it gets catered by the production team saying that yes, it's required, and they do the testing in a live test or a dev environment, we wouldn't know that whether the organization has really built the necessary safeguards for that test environment, leading to a potential situation where that there could be a breach in that test environment, leaking out the real data. So this would have its own set of impacts. So that is why we need to ensure that even such development or test environments, if they are going to handle all the real production data, which comprises of personal or sensitive personal or business critical data, they must have the necessary controls around how do you handle the production data. Basically, how do you make sure that the production data is going to be received to a non-production or a development environment or to a test environment in the most secure manner, thereby minimizing the exposure, minimizing the risk of unauthorized exposure, and proper access management and role-based access management and yeah, monitoring of personal data should be in place. So if you don't have the necessary kind of access controls in this kind of a test environment, it could lead to anyone having all kinds of privileged access, thereby modifying, altering, or breaching the confidentiality of the personal data which is going to be used in the test environment. Plus, you need to have the necessary kind of detection or audit logging, user activity logging controls, even in this test environment, just because you're using the real production data. And then the third quadrant talks about timely and secure disposal of personal data. Now, the thing is, like we discussed earlier, the key traits of the privacy principles, where there was something called as a storage limitation. So this touches upon that aspect. Now, this should be in line with what is the retention timeline that you have already agreed to for a set of data attributes of personal data. If you say you're going to retain personal data of individuals for up to 5 years from the date of creation, so beyond 5 years, you should never retain it in your test environment. So you need to ensure that this personal data is going to be deleted in the same manner, which is going to be the secure manner of deletion called out for the deletion in the production environment as well. So you should have a production similar control built for this test environment, even for the deletion, as in the disposal of personal data in a timely manner. So yeah, and the last quadrant is about encapsulation or pseudonymization. You can, I mean, have different kinds of technologies for this, but the overall objective here is to achieve the aspect of hiding the actual data from unauthorized individuals. Now, the thing is, you need to, so if you're talking about any system or any application or its database processing any kind of or storing any kind of sensitive personal data, we need to have encryption mechanisms in place so that it is not visible to anyone. So assume that there are weaker controls around access management, or probably any other kind of monitoring controls are weak in the organization. And if this data in the non-production setup is actually breached, so it will lead to a bigger risk that you will expose your data to the outside world. So it's better to encrypt it. So even if there is a breach, you can still be safeguarded and be assured that you are not exposing your data. So you need to have such safeguards in place, even in the test environment, when you're making use of the actual production real world data. Yeah, and yeah, at the end, yes, we've got okay, this cycle around managing the retention and disposal of personal data, which is about the personal data management. So there are various aspects to manage the personal data. It starts from retention, backup, and maintaining integrity of it, e-discovery, and disposal. So yeah, so the thing is, retention and storage talks about how long you are supposed to retain the data, and how do you ensure that the data is going to be retained for only as long as you have agreed to retain it, or have or you have defined to retain it, beyond which you should never be retaining it. And backup and restoration is going to be in line with that requirement which you have called out, that if you're going to retain data for 5 years, how are you going to ensure that this data is going to be made available as and when needed during the 5 years period? So by having proper backups in place, periodic backups in place, and just the backups are not sufficient. So you need to have complementary activities, which is around restoration. So assume that we have backed up data on a daily basis, but in the event of a disaster, if we are not able to read that backed up data, then that backup file is of no use for the organization. So we also need to perform restoration testing in a periodic manner to ensure that the data that is backed up is available. So availability is a very important aspect there, and maintaining integrity. Now, for the data that needs to be maintained for a period of 5 years or 10 years, it is very important to ensure that this data remains unaltered or unmodified during that entire period. So this can be accomplished by various means such as your access controls, then any alerting and logging mechanisms to make sure that any such attempt shall be logged, and any prevention measures saying that if you have put encryption mechanisms in place, you have proper key management so that such alterations or modifications cannot be done. And then comes the e-discovery aspect. So I need to make sure that any personal data that I have in my system for the period that it needs to be retained should be, I should be able to search through and identify and fetch that data. If I cannot fetch that data, then I am actually failing to provide a particular service which is a very key ingredient of the personal data life cycle. So maybe the best example could be in cases where a customer of a particular organization files a lawsuit against the company for an organization which uh, hold on just a moment.
Hi, Shrant, is there an issue?
No, I think you had messaged me on the group about, and I think you were calling back on the group as well. Yeah, on the WhatsApp group that you had created. So just looking into that. Okay, no problem. I think it was about the questions that you had posted there, right?
Yeah, yeah, the questions have been posted. You can take them after the presentation
Yeah,
finishes.
yeah. Okay, fine. All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I was talking about e-discovery there. So the example that I was trying to give here is that I'm running a company into the payment business, and a customer comes back to me, let's say a few months down the line, about a fraudulent transaction that's happened in his account. Now, and he goes to court to sue me against that. Now, if I am not able to run through my data sets and fetch all the information related to the transactions or related to the dispute that he's talking about, then I might end up paying a lot of legal fines to that customer, which might really be unnecessary because I might have the necessary mechanisms to show that there was no such dispute that happened, but lack of such e-discovery controls will lead to a situation where I might end up paying a lot of penalties to that individual. So it's very important to have this e-discovery feature where I should be able to fetch through the data that I have in my systems. And yeah, and the disposal, like we have talked about earlier in the earlier sections as well. It's very important that we dispose of all the copies of personal data that we have post the retention timeline, and it should be disposed of in the most secure manner such that it cannot be recovered. So this is the, yeah. So this was around the management of personal data and its life cycle. Yeah, so this at this we come to the end of this session, and thanks for your patience, and do let me know your questions on that, and we'll just go through the questions that you've already posted on the chat window, and we will start responding to it.
Thank you so much, Shrant. And Ashish, we have already shared the questions on the group with you. All those are there that are on the chat window. You may start taking the questions now. For the participants, if there are any other questions, please share it on the chat window. We'll make sure that they are answered.
So, Chirant, I will start with the first question. Basically, the question is how audit helps in privacy and data security. Also, in audit, what specialization we can have? Do we have certification in it? And is audit part of cybersecurity? So, I'll break this question. Also, Chirant, later on you can add. So, yes, audit is a part of cybersecurity requirements. Uh, and the other question is what specialization we can have. So there are various certifications available in the market where you can be also certified lead auditors, or there are other auditor courses which are available. And how audit helps in privacy and data security. So many times you see, right, you saw that GDPR has fined XYZ company of $1 million or some dollars. That is basically come out from the assessment where they found the gap, or sometimes there could be chances they might have found from incident that is not a part of audit. But when actual assessor goes to the company and they find out that okay, something this is missing and this should be a compliant, that is a part of audit. And it helps company to ensure their security and the technologies what they're using, it's more robust and strong, again what is required as per the regulation. So audit helps a lot. Anything you want to add, Chirant, on this?
Yeah, thanks Ashish for that. Yeah, just another thing is that apart from the regulatory audits, which just Ashish clarified, there could be audits that are performed by the organization as part of their internal audit division or internal security teams, where they could end up detecting gaps in the design of the application that they have developed, or gaps in the way the applications are actually functioning, which will thereby help them to be up to date with the security and privacy requirements, thereby not falling in the regulatory violation ambit.
Great. I'll go for the next question.
Yeah.
It says how we can ensure to follow the traits of regulation or compliance. So as to ensure privacy design in SDLC, is it code we write, or how we can achieve these traits? So you want to go with this, Chirag?
Yeah, hold on. How we can ensure to follow the traits of regulation or compliance so as to ensure privacy by design in SDLC. Uh, how do we ensure? Yeah. So the okay, maybe like I explained earlier, it is by way of capturing the necessary designs or capturing the necessary privacy requirements as part of the functionality that we want to push to the application, or as part of the application that we want to develop. Just to give you a very basic example, let's assume that I am developing a mobile application which wants to provide services to users where they can request for, let's say, household services at their home by placing a request. Now, I say that, okay, I'll just place a mobile number as a key identifier for all these customers, and I'll ask them to log in with one-time password. Now, but me as a security professional, when we are developing this, keeping personal data privacy bill in mind, we know that a lot of other details about this customer will be accessed by the application, such as by way of the details that are there inside the home, because they actually visit the home and do some cleaning services, plus the address of this person. So I'll recommend them to use single sign-on so that they don't, nobody actually misuses nobody from the operations team or the support team misuses the data that's already being accessed through the application. So this will help the developers to look at the plan and determine that, okay, for all these features that I'm developing, this is the authentication that I need to build in for the end product as well. So this is how it will address the compliance requirement that's called out in an organization, thereby also ensuring the secure SDLC design concepts. And also there is another aspect to it, that you need to so there would be awareness sessions conducted in the organization. How do you need to develop code using secure coding practices by not using what do you call invalid libraries, or not using insecure functionalities and any such things. So by following such practices, you will minimize the chance of many more errors that are getting propped up during the secure SDLC reviews. So all this combined, you can achieve the compliance to a secure SDLC and privacy by design.
Yeah. The third one is basically, third question is, what are the technology or technical controls regulators accepted if organizations are storing or processing end user personal data? So to answer this question is basically depending on the what is the company size and what is the volume of the data you're storing. Depending on those, the technology and technical requirements or controls will be implemented. But as a basis, India also have cyber framework which mandates governments or also a business to implement those cyber framework. So that is also more than sufficient if you are not processing high level of personal data. So in terms of any if you take any regulation, it will not mandate you what technical requirements or technology you have to implement. It's up to you what technology or technical controls you have to implement. At the end, the goal should be that you should be 100% compliance with the regulation requirement. So that will be the end goal. Next question is also very interesting. It says, if in a wallet business now want to expand to a loan business, can wallet company use the data of wallet customer for analytics and understanding? So question is both. First is yes and second is no. Why I'm saying yes is, if during the consent in the beginning, if I've already mentioned that this data will process for the different business services apart from a wallet business, if my business into multiple different services, and you have given the consent, they are allowed to process your data, because at that time you might have not read, just you click on I agree. If no, if in the consent, if they are only told that we'll be using only your data for wallet business, they are not allowed, legally they are not allowed. It's the continuation of the same question itself. Should they take respective permission from the owners? Yes, they have to take a permission if already taken in the beginning. Also, if they don't do, if they do use data without informing end user, how the user will get to know that data was used from other purpose? So it's very interesting thing. There are very, as you know, the first question was asked on the audit. To answer that, this question, there's one more thing which every regulation as a body, they will go and audit such organization. There could be chances during the audit you can find out. There could be chances that you, as an end user, you can find out that whatever the data you have given for wallet business, and you might be receiving calls regarding the loan. Directly, basically, you can come to know that, okay, some of the data has been gone for my loan department, which I have not allowed, and you can file a case against those organization with a DPO. I'm not saying not DPO, to the authorities, and authority will take action basis on the audit or assessment. So yes, there is a way to find out if they're doing without taking permission. The next question is, says, if organization does not fall directly under any of the regulation in India, who will make sure that the organization is following data privacy? Example, SaaS product development company. It says, I'll repeat the question. If organization does not fall directly under any regulations in India. So you're talking about the outside of the company. Let's say, for example, if it's AWS, which is, let's say, not fall directly under any of the regulations in India, who will make sure that the organization is following data privacy? So I think that question, I am not so clear.
Ashish, you want me to take it up?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So let's assume we are talking about a company who's using a SaaS product like AWS or Microsoft Azure. And in India, we don't have any regulation as of now because the personal data protection bill is currently in draft stage. But still, this company needs to operate in a safe and secure manner, because see this, if we are talking about a SaaS product or a cloud service provider, it is a global organization. Now, in other countries, definitely it will be compliant to the regulations of the land, like GDPR or CCP or any such thing. But even in India, so there is something called as like what we discussed at the initial set of the discussion about a PR impact, public relations impact, or brand impact. Now, uh, even though there is no regulation here, all the consumers in Indian ecosystem are also tech savvy and equally aware of the global regulations in place, and they are more concerned about the privacy of their own data. So if such organizations are not providing such compliance mandates or doing such compliance audits like service organization control audit or any such thing, no a client organization will take their services. Like if I am a startup company running a wallet management company or a loan provider company where I need to maintain my application on AWS, if AWS is not having the necessary compliance requirements around doing periodic audits or being compliant to ISO 27001 or any such SSAE 16 or service organization control to requirements around privacy and security and confidentiality, I will not take their services. So I'll make sure that I'll build my contracts in such a way that if I have a breach, they will be penalized accordingly. So that's how it will be taken up. I hope that answers the question here.
Yeah, Jiran, go next question also.
Sure. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, the next one is how do you know about spyware attack in online payment? So, so this question has like multiple dimensions to it. Now, it could happen at the client side or at the server side. So, let's take the first example of the client side issue. Let's assume I am this customer of a particular bank who's performing a credit card transaction on, say, a website where I want to buy some goods or services. So now I don't know so whether my system has been infected or my internet browser has been infected or my system is infected with malware or spyware already, which will increase the risk of me what do you say leaking my own data to some third party website which is not even the merchant website, and it could hijack my account as well. So this is one possibility where a spyware can happen without an organization's role in it at all for the customer. So the merchant will not be responsible here. I will be responsible for safeguarding my own data by having the right kind of patched operating system in my own computer and having the necessary antivirus technologies in place, which are also updated with the right signatures and using a proper session in the right kind of internet browsers, not using old and outdated internet browsers for all these kinds of payment activities. Then the second part on this is around the merchant himself, as in the organization themselves. Now, if there's an attack that happens on the server side about on their own payment system, if okay, let's take an example of PayU or Paytm or any such payment gateway companies. Now, if somebody, I mean, tries to attack that system by installing a spyware on their backend, because it ended up getting exposed there inadvertently by some engineering team members. Now, first of all, organization needs to have proper mechanism in place to detect it in at the earliest possible time and have a team to respond to such things and contain the effect of such what do you call attacks. And second thing is they need to have the necessary kind of logging and alerting mechanism so that they will be able to trace back that it happened from so and so individual or so and so company or such and such a source, so they can penalize them, go against them legally, and take the necessary action. So this is how you could what do you call deal with spyware attacks in an online payment mechanism. So I hope that answers the question. So with that, we will go to the next one, which is what is your view on the privacy certification by ISACA? So I think you are referring to the CDP-SE certification, which is relatively new to the privacy landscape, which has been released by ISACA. So as of now, it seems to be fairly reasonably good enough to cover the aspects of privacy, and that's also one of the alternatives to the other certifications that are already there being provided by different what do you call organizations similar to ISACA, something like CIPP and CIPM. But yes, it's relatively new, so we will have to. I mean, it takes time to determine what is the industry level acceptance of this certification at present. So maybe Ashish, do you want to add something on that?
I think yeah, it covers most of the ISACA IIPP. That's more than enough.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, can you explain the QR scam? What exactly is done by them? So, let's say, for example, you're using Google Pay or Phone Pay to make Paytms at a merchant site, and similarly, because you've installed that, so what happens? You go and you basically get some services done by someone, and that person says, "My company's payment mechanism is currently not working. I'll drop you a WhatsApp message with the QR code for my payment using PhonePe. Can you please do that?" So what he does, he'll actually send you a link. So yeah, to your number through WhatsApp. So and when you click open that link, it will generate a QR code which would end up getting scanned by your own phone camera. But instead of actually going to the right place for authorizing a payment, it might end up doing multiple things, which would be around accessing your phone data records and putting some bloatware into it, or it could end up siphoning more details after you authorize the payment from your bank account. So these are the multiple sets of things that could be done by it, but yeah, it depends on what is the attack vector of that. Anything that you want to add on this, Ashish?
No, I think I think we are good. I
Yeah.
think next question.
Yeah.
The disposal should be demanded by the end user. So disposal should be demanded by the end user, or it is the call of the data controller alone. Further, how communication will happen between two entities post deletion of the data, and how to ensure that there is any digital proof of mandate to have a point of contact on their website on the company, who is the first point of contact for all data subjects, right? Data subject rights. So one of the subject rights is the data erasure. So data erasure is only allowed if it's meeting the legal requirement. If legal requirement says you are supposed to, and if you are requesting to delete the data before that timeline, they will deny your request, and the data will be them. Post qualify for the data deletion process, you are meeting the legal requirement also. They will delete the data, and the acknowledgement or the email will come from the team or the specific organization saying that your data has been deleted. That will be your digital proof. So anything you want to add, Chirag, on this?
No, I think that's fair enough. That's enough.
Okay.
Covered.
Next question says, after encryption also, is there any chance of hacking data? There are, again, depending on the how the strong encryption you're using. If the encryption is not nowadays, there are multiple softwares who will know ensure that whatever the data has been encrypted, it will de-encrypt. So depending on the tool or the encryption mechanism you're using, there could be chances of your data confidential data has been leaked. Next is privacy will be passed in 2021. I hope so. It will not take much time. How to make sure the products follow these regulations? So to make sure we are future proof with regard to this regulation. So regulation will come with a deadline when it will get enacted. It will allow most of the companies organization to get compliant with that within duration of 12 to 24 months. Within that, they have to understand the requirement from the regulation, make their governance according to the requirement of the regulations, comply with those regulations, perform internal audits. So that will be the requirements basis. The government will initiate the internal assessments. If any issues come, on those. So that is the way, basically, how once it passes, most of the companies ensure that they are the or PDP. Next, certification. Hardly, if most of the times it varies from your 70,000 to 40,000, depending on what certification you want to do. If it's ISO Either it starts from 17,000 range. It might, if it leads to ISACA, it might be around 45 to 50,000. So that's the range for your certification. Question? Any other questions? We are happy to answer.
I think all questions have been taken up. Just, yeah.
Great, then I think we'll wind up in
Yep,
that case.
sure. Thank you,
Sure.
Ashish. Yeah, and yes, thanks everyone, and thanks Shika as well
Yeah,
for
thank you
attending
so
the
much,
session. Yeah.
Chirag and Ashish, for a very insightful session. I think you have shared many details regarding privacy, which will be very beneficial for all the attendees. Thank you so much for participating and speaking in this session today.
Thank you. Thank you, Cybersec team.
Thank you,
So
everyone.
best of
Thank you,
luck,
the
everyone,
SciSec
with
team.
your
Yeah.
question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks a
All the
lot.
best for everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
As for the attendees, we will now be sharing